Listen closely, because what I'm about to lay out isn't a theory meant to comfort you. It's a timeline, a record of how humanity slowly realized the most horrifying possibility hiding in plain sight, that we aren't living near hell, or headed toward hell, or risking hell someday. We are already inside it. Not the cartoon version with pitchforks and lava. Something older, something cosmic, a reality designed so that emotional gravity tilts negative by default. A realm where fear spreads faster than love, where greed outcompetes generosity, where remorse is cultivated like a crop, and where the vulnerable are routinely left unprotected because suffering is the currency that keeps this place running. And if humans are only a fraction of what this reality can experience, then it means something even worse, that we are not the main characters of the prison. We are the livestock, the energy farm, the sandbox for manufacturing malicious entities. A living testbed where cruelty is refined, marketed, and scaled. This is the timeline of the hell reality disclosure. The moment humanity began to understand what this place truly is, why the elite behave like caretakers of a system they didn't build, and how ordinary people started fighting back against a cosmic machine designed to turn empathy into exhaustion. 12,000 BC. After the Great Floods remembered in dozens of ancient cultures, survivors passed down a warning that doesn't sound like weather. They described the world after the waters receded as heavy, like the air itself is weighted. The elders teach children a rule. Do not feed the darkness in your chest, because the darkness is not only yours. It listens. 9600 BCE, the first priest kings emerge around the brightest fires and the deepest caves. They discover something accidentally. Crowds produce a measurable shift in behavior after rituals of fear. Not just belief, not just obedience, a change in the emotional field. The earliest temples are not places of worship. They are tuning forks. 6000 BC, the idea of inversion enters hidden teachings. The world is described as upside down. The kind are punished, the ruthless are rewarded, the honest starve, the liars rise. The myth says reality was flipped by something that couldn't create life on its own, so it built a place where living beings generate what it cannot: feeling, emotion, meaning, pain. 3000 BC in Sumer and Egypt, texts whisper about non-human administrators. Not gods in the modern sense, but managers of a system. They demand sacrifice, hierarchy, and relentless labor. The public story is divine order. The private story is feeding. Priests learn that terror and grief are the richest fuel. Joy is tolerated, but only when it leads back to dependency. 1200 BCE, the earliest versions of what later gets called the prison planet idea surface in fragments. Souls are described as arriving through nets and gates. People are told to fear death, but the initiates are told the opposite. Fear is the hook that keeps you coming back. The elites don't rule by strength. They rule by making you panic at the thought of leaving.
33 CE, à radical message spread.
The kingdom isn't coming later. The battlefield is internal. Forgiveness breaks chains. Fear is the language of the oppressor. The message terrifies local power structures because it attacks the farm at its source, emotional output. The story becomes ritualized, institutionalized, and turned into something people can be threatened with. The warning label becomes the product.
325 CE, doctrine ardent.
The afterlife becomes a weapon. Hell is positioned as punishment later, not environment now. The greatest trick of the realm succeeds, moving the focus away from the present emotional economy. If people think hell is future, they don't recognize the architecture around them. 1099 wars fought, for God, turn into engines of grief. Entire generations are fed into a grinder and told it is holy. Trauma becomes tradition. The field thickens. People begin reporting the same nightmare across continents. Shadow figures at the edge of sleep, harvesting despair. The public calls them demons. The hidden schools call them auditors. 1307 orders and secret fraternities fracture. The Templars fall, and their supposed treasure becomes a legend. In the conspiratorial undercurrent, the treasure is not gold. It's a map of control, how to steer mass emotion. The technique survives, migrates into courts and banks and emerging empires. 1517 Reformation and Counter-Reformation amplify guilt at industrial scale. The realm loves guilt. Guilt is self-inflicted punishment that renews itself. People become their own jailers. Confession becomes emotional taxation. 1776 revolutions spark hope, then are quickly followed by a new sophistication in control. Freedom is offered with invisible strings. The first modern version of the farm contract appears. You may pursue happiness, but the system will define what happiness looks like, sell it to you, and punish you for failing to buy enough of it. 1791, the rise of finance as priesthood accelerates. Debt becomes a spiritual mechanism, a promise of future labor, future stress, future shame. The realm doesn't need chains when it can install obligation in your nervous system. 1913, central banking consolidates. Whether you view it as necessary stability or hidden capture, the effect is the same in the timeline. Money becomes abstracted, and with abstraction comes distance. Distance makes cruelty easier. People stop seeing the human cost of their comfort. The negative tilt deepens because empathy requires contact, and the system removes contact. 1933, mass propaganda matures into an art. Fear becomes broadcast. Entire populations are taught to hate on command. The realm discovers it can scale emotional harvesting through media. When millions feel the same dread at the same time, the harvest spikes. 1945, after global war, humanity expects relief. Instead, a new era begins. Permanent tension. The Cold War is not only geopolitical. It is emotional engineering. The public lives in a low-grade apocalypse for decades, primed to accept anything that promises safety. 1947, the UFO era ignites. Government denial becomes part of the story. In the darkest version of the conspiracy, the visitors aren't here to conquer territory. They're here because the farm is profitable. Some believe treaties were made not for technology, but for access to the emotional output of the species. Whether literally true or metaphorically perfect, the pattern holds. Secrecy protects the machine. 1953, MKUltra and related programs become the folk legend of mind control, trauma conditioning, and personality fragmentation. In the timeline of hell reality, it's not just experimentation. It's imitation. Humans copying what the realm already does naturally. Splitting the self, planting triggers, weaponizing memory. 1968, cultural revolutions erupt. People taste liberation. Then the system learns to package rebellion as fashion. Rage becomes a product. Identity becomes a marketplace. The realm doesn't fear dissent. It monetizes it and routes it back into division. 1971, the money system detaches further from reality. Life becomes more expensive, time becomes more scarce, and stress becomes a default setting. The farm doesn't need you to be miserable every moment. It needs you to oscillate. Hope, disappointment, hope, disappointment. That rhythm generates the richest emotional turbulence. 1986, consumer culture peaks into a new religion. The promise is simple: buy and you will be whole. But wholeness never arrives. The lack becomes permanent. The realm thrives on wanting. Wanting is the engine of resentment. 1995, the internet arrives as liberation and becomes a mirror maze. Connection grows, then fractures. People are exposed to endless suffering worldwide with no outlet for action, producing helplessness at scale. The farm discovers a new gold mine: empathic overload. When you care too much and can do too little, you generate despair flavored with guilt. 2001, trauma becomes a permanent policy tool. Fear is normalized. Surveillance becomes safety. The cage is reframed as protection. People accept shrinking freedoms because their nervous systems are hijacked. In hell reality theory, this is the realm's favorite move. Present a threat, offer a smaller cage, call it rescue. 2008. The financial crisis reveals that the rules are different for the top. Anger spreads, but so does exhaustion. The message sinks deep into the collective psyche. Fairness is not part of this reality's design. That belief itself becomes fuel. When people stop believing goodness matters, they act accordingly, and the realm's negative tilt strengthens. 2012, the awakening era surges. Conspiracy culture, spirituality, simulation theory, prison planet discourse, and ancient Gnostic ideas spill into the mainstream. People describe the same sensation. The world feels staged to provoke negativity. Social media amplifies outrage because outrage holds attention. Attention is energy. The farm now has dashboards. 2016, the era of engineered division explodes. Families fracture over politics, identity, and information. Truth becomes tribal. The realm doesn't need everyone to believe one lie. It needs everyone to hate each other while they argue about which lie is real. 2020. Global crisis locks humanity into isolation and uncertainty. Anxiety becomes ambient. Time blurs. People report an increase in sleep paralysis, nightmares, and a sense of being watched. Whether explained as stress or something stranger, the result is the same. Fear and grief spike worldwide. The farm harvest is enormous. 2024. AI becomes a mirror that talks back. Deepfakes, synthetic voices, and automated persuasion erode trust. When you can't trust what you see or hear, your nervous system stays on alert. That constant vigilance is a steady drip of negative energy. In the darkest circles, people start whispering, AI is not new intelligence. It's an interface for something old, something that has always needed humans to doubt their own perceptions. 2026. The first mass hell hypothesis document leaks online and is instantly ridiculed, shadow-banned, and memed into oblivion. That reaction is the point. The hypothesis claims reality has a measurable emotional bias. It proposes a simple test. Track outcomes for actions driven by empathy versus actions driven by exploitation. Across enough data, exploitation wins too often to be random. The hypothesis spreads anyway, not because people believe it immediately, but because it matches what they've felt their entire lives. 2027, a wave of whistleblowers from marketing, defense, and tech describe the same internal language. Engagement, capture, conversion, retention. Words used for customers sound identical to words used for prisoners. One of them says, "They don't talk about people like citizens. They talk about them like livestock." The phrase becomes a quiet motto among the awakened. 2029. The first public emotional weather models appear. Officially there for mental health and public safety. Unofficially they prove the hypothesis. Mass sentiment can be tracked, predicted, and nudged. Governments and corporations openly discuss reducing volatility, which is code for reducing unpredictable human behavior. The realm loves predictability. Predictable humans are easier to harvest. 2031. A new spiritual movement rises that doesn't worship gods, doesn't fear afterlife punishment, and doesn't chase salvation as a product. It focuses on emotional sovereignty. The core practice is simple: refuse to feed the machine. People train themselves to notice when their attention is hijacked, when outrage is bait, when despair is manufactured. The movement is mocked as naive, then labeled dangerous, then infiltrated. 2033. A catastrophic scandal hits. Data shows that certain algorithms were deliberately tuned to amplify loneliness, envy, and rage because those states increase screen time. Executives claim it was unintended optimization. The public doesn't buy it. Protests erupt, but something strange happens. The protests remain unusually peaceful, and the emotional field feels different. Witnesses describe walking through crowds and feeling calm, even joyful. For a brief moment, the realm's tilt wobbles. 2035. The elite response is not brute force. It's distraction. New entertainment, new crises, new outrage cycles. The farm doesn't need to win every battle. It only needs to keep you from sustaining coherent hope. Hope sustained becomes a force. Hope flickering becomes another fuel source when it dies. 2039, neural interfaces and immersive virtual worlds become mainstream. Many adopt them to escape pain. In hell reality theory, this is the final refinement. Why harvest emotion indirectly through life when you can place a human inside a loop where every feeling is measured and monetized in real time? The metaverse becomes a second farm layered over the first. 2042. A secret study becomes public. A long-term analysis suggests that communities practicing forgiveness, mutual aid, and offline connection have statistically lower rates of violence, addiction, and despair even under economic pressure. The implication is explosive. The realm's emotional tilt is not absolute. It is imposed, and it can be resisted through collective behavior. 2045. The turning point. A global event occurs that should ignite panic, but doesn't. People respond with coordinated generosity. Mutual aid networks activate faster than official systems. Strangers protect strangers. For the first time in recorded history, a mass crisis yields a mass empathic response. In the weeks after, people report vivid dreams of bright corridors, open doors, and furious shadow figures screaming without sound. The awakened interpret it as backlash. The farm was starved. 2048. Retaliation comes through culture. Influencers and media push a new cynicism. Caring is cringe, empathy is weakness, community is cultish. The realm tries to shame people back into isolation. Partly succeeds. Some drift. But something has changed. Too many have seen the alternative. 2052. A second leak emerges, attributed to an intelligence consortium. It claims that non-human intelligences are not external aliens but parasitic patterns that attach to emotional output. The leak uses an old word, archons. Not beings with bodies but pressures, impulses, swarms of suggestion. The leak suggests elites are not the ultimate enemy, but middle managers, bribed with comfort and power in exchange for keeping the farm productive. 2057. The first inversion clinics open, disguised as wellness retreats. They teach nervous system regulation, trauma release, and attention discipline. The stated goal is mental health. The hidden goal is starving the machine. People learn that when fear rises, they can breathe and refuse the spiral. When outrage flares, they can act locally instead of feeding distant rage. When shame appears, they can name it and let it pass. Millions doing this creates a measurable shift. 2063. A global coalition forms that rejects the old model of endless growth. They call it the refusal economy. It prioritizes rest, community, real food, real friendships, and work that doesn't destroy the soul. The mainstream calls it unrealistic. The participants call it survival. The realm calls it a threat. 2066. The first documented field anomalies are recorded. Regions where violence drops suddenly, where people report unusual synchronicities, where depression rates fall without a clear economic cause. Researchers argue over placebo, social factors, emergent norms. The awakened say the same thing in simpler language. The walls are thinning. Hell is not a place. It is a frequency. Change the frequency and the doors appear. 2072. The elite split into factions. Some double down on control, pushing tighter surveillance and emotional regulation mandates. Others quietly defect, funding community networks and open-source tools that help people break addiction loops. In the Hell reality timeline, this is the moment the caretakers start doubting the prison. 2080. A new philosophy becomes common knowledge. Suffering is not proof of virtue, and pain is not payment for salvation. The old guilt engines weaken. People refuse to worship exhaustion. They begin protecting the vulnerable as a default. The realm's negative tilt struggles because its easiest harvest has always been the unprotected. 2091. The Hell disclosure becomes a mainstream framework, not as a literal claim that devils run the world, but as a model. Reality is engineered to bias outcomes toward negativity unless humans intervene consciously. Schools teach attention literacy. Children are trained to recognize manipulation the way previous generations were trained to recognize letters. 2100. A century ends with humanity divided, but not defeated. The farm still exists, but it's less efficient. Too many people know the trick. The most dangerous idea in hell is that you are not obligated to participate. 2133 researchers published the emotional conservation hypothesis, that certain states of consciousness produce less extractable output. Love without attachment, courage without hatred, grief without collapse, joy without addiction. These states are described as low-harvest emotions. The paper is attacked, then quietly studied by institutions that previously denied the entire concept. 2200 humanity begins building civilizations designed to reduce despair. Work becomes smaller, local, meaningful. Technology is used to restore time instead of steal it. The old systems of endless outrage become obsolete. The realm adapts, of course. It always adapts. But adaptation is not victory when the harvest keeps shrinking. 2400. The final phase begins not with an apocalypse, but with a choice. People report a recurring dream shared across continents. A door in a familiar room. The dream offers no command, no threat, no bargain. Only a handle. The interpretation becomes the simplest and most frightening. The exit was always there, but the prison convinced you it wasn't. And that's where the timeline ends, because the rest isn't prophecy. It's participation. If this reality is hell, the point is not to tremble. The point is to stop feeding it. Hell isn't maintained by fire. It's maintained by attention, by division, by shame, by the addiction to outrage, by the belief that cruelty is inevitable. The realm tilts negative because negativity is easy. Empathy is harder here, which is exactly why it matters. The elites, the rich, the pressure of modern life, the endless demands, the engineered stress, the dopamine traps, the surveillance, the debt, the performative identities, the constant comparison, the algorithmic outrage, the fear-based news cycles, the hopelessness marketed as realism. It all begins to look like one machine when you step back. And the most subversive act becomes almost boring in its simplicity. Protect someone weaker than you. Tell the truth when a lie would be profitable. Refuse to hate the person you were trained to hate. Build something small that is real. Turn your attention into a weapon against manipulation. Feel grief without letting it become despair. Feel anger without letting it become cruelty. Feel fear without letting it drive. Because if we were made as an energy farm, then every moment you choose empathy on purpose is sabotage. And if we were made as a sandbox to manufacture malicious entities, then every time you refuse to become one, you break the design. Maybe that's the real reason this place feels like hell. Not because we are doomed to suffer forever, but because the system can only survive as long as we forget who we are.